So we're continuing with chapter 6 of Save This Mountain, and we're going to do the before chapter 6 there was a meditation which Jonathan didn't do. So we're going to go through the meditation first, and then get to chapter 6, which is unmasking oppression. So imagine it's Sunday morning, 1511. You're somewhere in Central America. I'm not sure exactly where, but so a Dominican friar ascends to the pulpit of a church in the New World. Furiously he thunders, "By what right and by what justice do you hold the Indians in such cruel and horrible bondage? Aren't they dying, or better said, aren't you killing them to get gold every day? Are you not obliged to love them as yourselves? Don't you understand this? Don't you feel it?"
That's good, Dennis. That's like.
What would be your reaction to such a denunciation, or an accusation, maybe is a better word?
Yeah.
Depends on how much gold is involved.
Well, okay, how much gold does it take?
Spoken like a true American.
Well, if I was a friar, I might feel my life was in jeopardy.
Okay.
What's defined? The New World would be down there, down in the.
Well, that's all
Yeah.
North and
South America.
North and South America, both.
This is probably a Central America.
Yeah, it's the. Well, here's what the congregation did.
Yeah.
The congregation reacted with fury. "We'll denounce you to the king. You'll be deported."
Exactly what I said. Owner of the gold mines.
But there was one guy, Bartolome de las Casas. He remained silent. Owner of gold mines, plantations, and slaves. He was a wealthy man. But this Dominican preaching he heard and reading the Bible and what he could see with his own eyes convinced or convicted, I'm not sure which is the better way, but convicted him that what was being done to the native people was unjust. Consequently, he sold his gold mines, plantations, freed his slaves, and became an advocate for the native people of the New World, and was known as the Apostle to the Indians. Eventually, his advocacy before the royal court of Spain, it took him, I think, 50 years to get that done, but led to slavery being banished, at least by the Spaniards. So things didn't have to end in a civil war to end slavery. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
So his story is one of repentance and conversion from being an oppressor to advocate for the oppressed. So let's say, which side are you on? And think before you answer. Does anybody see shades of gray in their answer? No? Black and white first?
I mean, I
thought you said something else. Never mind.
I try to think of, what their response would have
I'm
been.
talking about the answer there.
I understand that.
1511.
Steve.
1511, I'm just curious, the struggle that they had, because, they came from probably feeling oppressed themselves, and now they're hearing this guy tell them that you're oppressing the indigenous people. So that's why I think they rose up against him, just like, you can't say that. But
who do you think was in the audience then?
Well, they're all immigrants, I think the audience was people who came to the Americas for a better life. So, we know now that they trampled over everybody else's rights in order to do it, but I don't think they saw it that way. It's not.
You're skeptical of what
It's
she's
black
saying.
and white. It's black and white to me in 2023. I don't think it was black and white to them. That's my answer.
Oh,
Well,
no, it was, well, go ahead, Artie.
all of the places where they built the churches and, the area around there, they started trying to force the Native Americans to become Catholic, to
Yeah,
become
they
Christians.
wiped them out. The Mayans,
And,
the Mayans
yeah.
were wiped out
Yeah,
in that
and
time.
so the friar, he was kind of out there on his own, it sounds like, because they did
Yeah.
basically the same or worse.
Mhm.
Well, the reason I said think before you answer, because I was thinking, well, think of the products we use. Where are they made? Are they made in some sweatshop somewhere? Somebody
Some of them.
shipped their factory overseas so they can make stuff in an environment where there's no environmental controls. They can just
No child labor laws.
no child labor laws. So,
Mhm.
what stock do you own? If you have investments in stocks, what companies are you buying your stocks? Are they or mutual funds or whatever? It gets. That's why I'm saying, what does it get kind of gray instead of just, oh, it's clear I'm not an oppressor. I don't do those things.
I want to tell you an experience that happened this week to one of our bus drivers, and it's not entirely oppression, but it is a little bit. She was telling me that 2 years ago she came into the base after driving her route, and there was a gentleman that came up to her and started yelling at her, and he was a small bus driver, and he was just verbally attacking her and attacking her and attacking her because he said she cut him off. And she said it was so bad that our gal that's over, she's assistant manager of the bus company, of course, she got in between the two to get him to stop. 2 years ago, on Friday, or a week or two ago, she noticed him driving the bus in, and he would wave at her and kind of smile. And she thought, that's kind of weird, And he did it a second time. And on Friday, he came up to her in the base and he apologized to her. He said this has really been bothering him for a while. And he said that you did not deserve to be, to take what I gave you that day and when I was yelling at you. And he obviously had an experience where it was really working on his soul that he had done something wrong to this girl. And he apologized, and she was shocked but pleased. But there's different ways of oppression that you don't think of. But you don't have to necessarily own a slave.
Right.
You can do other things that oppress other people.
Yeah, I was thinking last week we were talking about that. My family didn't own slaves, but the Wood family came over in 1851, went to Utah, came back, and all that stuff. But in my family line, I have Ferguses, I have Huttons, who were Southerners, fought for the South, I believe. There was Luss that came from Virginia, Darks. All these people, all of us have, our roots go way out into society.
It's hard not to find a racist in our roots. I mean,
Right.
I had a great grandfather who was in the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah. That's not something I'm proud of, but it is something to look at just objectively, like we've come a long way. And of course, the point of your little exercise here, Dennis, and I took it very well just now. It's like he was saying to those people, he made them uncomfortable. Because they seemed to have a good reason to be there. And he said to them, wait a minute, you're missing the point of what this is doing to the indigenous. That's kind of what you just did to us. As I'm sitting here thinking, what did I buy yesterday? Do I look every time? No, I don't. I don't look at where my products came from. Make Skechers.
Well, your clothing too.
I'm not going to say
Oh, no,
bad news.
it's bad. I love Skechers.
Some things were, it's hard to,
We're
even
in
if you
trouble.
even if you know where it's made and you disagree with it, sometimes some of these things it's hard to get around.
I know.
But it's worthy of us to think about it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be uncomfortable sometimes.
Okay, we're going to get into chapter 6 now in the book, and Mark is 4. So I'll go ahead and read. Unless somebody wants to volunteer, I'll read this. But,
Yeah.
that day in the evening, he said to them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." So they left the crowd and took him with them in the boat in which he had been sitting, and some other boats went with him. A fierce squall blew up, and the waves broke over the boat until it was all but swamped. Now he was in the stern asleep on a cushion. They roused him and said, "Teacher, we are sinking. Do you not care?" He awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Silence, be still." The wind dropped and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you such cowards? Have you no faith even now?" They were awestruck and said to one another, "Who can this be? Even the wind and sea obey him." Now, there's some things that I've really never paid attention to. I've read that story a bunch of times,
Yeah.
but Mark refers to the freshwater lake as the sea twice, although Jesus, when he said, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake," so I wonder, well, why did he say sea? And this book kind of pointed out something I never thought about. Does the word sea evoke in your mind something different from the word lake?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's bigger and it's, nothing on the other side usually for a long ways.
Long way. Okay. Anybody else think of something different about the sea versus the lake?
Well, the lake doesn't have the waves like a sea does.
Some do.
Big waves?
Some do. Up in the Great
The Great
Lakes.
Lakes have
If you weren't talking
tides.
about
They have
the-
Up in the
tides.
Great
Okay.
Which sea are we talking about, or lake we're talking about?
If we were just thinking of a small
What
lake,
was the Sea of Galilee?
what was
The
it?
Sea of
a lake?
Galilee, a lake.
Was it actually a lake? Sea of Galilee?
Well, it's fed by a river. The Jordan River flows into it, I
What
believe.
flows out of it?
Well,
Jordan River, I believe.
lots of rivers flow into the ocean.
Okay.
Rivers flow into the
It's
ocean.
definitely a lake.
Well,
There it is. That could be a
Pretty
sea.
flat. Not much land on that.
Jonathan?
Waves depend on wind.
Oh, no. Waves depend on tides.
But in a lake.
Okay,
It depends on
let's listen to Jonathan. He's talking too. So,
Well, I'm just, some words have, I don't know what technical term, but some words sound spelling. Think about it. I see you, or I see across. But lakes, small and large and small, including ponds, have
well,
cases.
Gary.
Yeah. Me, the sea refers to something that is first almost untraversable, something that takes something extra in order to, whereas a lake is something that you can easily
Okay.
two different ideas of power and what extent you're overcome by the power of the water.
I don't want to disagree with the judge, but talk to Carol, who were on one of the Great Lakes. Because it was
A lot of sinkings up in there.
Yeah. Well, I know that the author. Okay, I'm going to go back to his
Yeah.
what the book says about sea. They think that sea evokes ideas of chaos and tumult. Now, I realize the Great Lakes have violent storms, and the Edmund Fitzgerald, it's sunk with 36,000 tons and more, something like that. I remember that song. And I've been up there and read the accounts of it. There was a museum I went to, so they can be violent too. But I think that's what the author says. It's the evoke thinking about the chaos of a sea. And I was trying to think of any other places in the scriptures. But anyway, he brings up, he says it makes him think of the tale of Jonah. Well, I read the story. Did anybody else think of the tale of Jonah when they read this chapter? Does anybody remember the story of Jonah, or other than being swallowed by the whale?
The whale part. He refused to go to that city, Nineveh.
So the Lord spoke to Jonah and told him to go to Nineveh, speak out against it, and Jonah didn't want to do that. So he got on a ship going to Spain. Says, but the Lord sent a strong wind out on the sea, and the storm was so violent that the ship was in danger of breaking up. The sailors were terrified and cried out for help, each one to his own God. Then, in order to lessen the danger, they threw the cargo overboard. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone below and was lying on the ship's hold, sound asleep. The captain found him there and said to him, "What are you doing asleep? Get up and pray to your God for help. Maybe he will feel sorry for us and spare our lives." And then the sailors drew lots. They wondered who was to blame for all their problems. And Jonah's name was drawn. And so they asked him, what are you doing here? Why, you're causing all these problems. And then the story, goes that he said, well, I'm the one. And he told him why he was running away. And so they threw him overboard. And the rest of the story, I think we know. He gets swallowed up. He gets spit up, then and goes to Nineveh and preaches to them. And the people, much to his dismay, they all repent. And they wear sackcloth and ashes, and the city isn't destroyed, which is what I think Jonah wanted to have happen, but that's not what happened. So the only part I saw that was familiar was the part about being on the ship about to sink. He's sound asleep. All that's real familiar with the story about Jesus up there on his cushion, sound asleep. I will say that one other thing happened when they threw him overboard. Instantly, the sea became calm, and so that was the story of Jonah.
There is a whale in Jonah's story.
Well, actually, a great fish.
Oh, well, that's
We always say whale.
We always say whale, don't we?
But it's a great fish in the scriptures.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I'll go back here before I reveal my scriptures. Any other scriptures you can think of that would make you think of the story of the crossing the sea or the lake, whichever you want to call it? I will point out in the story, after they get on, Jesus calms the waves and all that, then Mark reverts to calling it a lake. So Jesus says it's a lake, then Mark uses this word sea twice in my version. And then after that's over, then he goes back and calls it a lake. So it seems like he had an intent there. But anyway. Well, there was one other verse that I found that has a sort of a similar connection. This is in Psalm where it says, "Some went down into the sea in boats, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves were hushed." Before we move on to the next part of the story, what does this exchange between Jesus and the disciples reveal about the disciples? What do you think it reveals?
Well, Jesus called him out for not having enough faith.
Okay.
A turning point, maybe.
Turning point.
Yeah,
How
where
so?
they weren't quite all in, and then after that happened, they were all in.
And they were all awestruck, so they really kind of got the glimpse of his power.
But they were also asking questions still, weren't they?
And the NIV version of that scripture says that they were terrified. So I'm thinking they don't really know what to do.
Right.
I do think at some point, that whenever he says, take up your cross, I mean, that's later, I know, but that's when they finally turn. I think in this moment, they're still a little.
They're still a little shaky.
Well, they may have thought maybe
he's yelling
a
at him. He's yelling at him, and
Well, I'm going to take a side detour. How many have read the book The House in the Cerulean Sea?
Oh, I have.
Okay. I can't remember her name now, but the little gnome,
Yeah.
she had powers. This is a fantasy book for those who haven't read it. She had certain powers that the others were a little bit, when she threatened she could do something, they knew that they better, step lightly around her and tiptoe around what she was, if they didn't want to cross her. Maybe the disciples were like, whoa, this guy.
Hey,
They may have thought for a minute
he
was a witch or something like that, that's doing witchcraft.
Anyway, she could do certain things, and the others had respect for her. Maybe that's
I was
what.
gonna say, where's Nadine?
Does anybody else have anything to say about what they think it reveals about the disciples' understanding of what happened there?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. But what comes to mind is, when we are in chaos, what's the first thing we say? Oh Lord, save
Lord
me.
help me. Yeah.
And that's what they did.
Yeah.
That was just very human. I mean, they are not. They're disciples, but they're human.
Yeah. Well, another word I've heard for disciples, we use that and it gets to have a religious meaning, but another word is student. So Jesus is the teacher, they're the students. They're not the master teacher, you might call it. They're students, they're trying to learn.
Yeah.
And they keep learning all the way through after the crucifixion.
Yeah.
All the way up to going to an empty grave and walking away.
So you wonder.
They're still learning.
They're not very bright, I think.
Another question might come to my mind is, okay, so you can say the wind and the waves listen to Jesus, but do the disciples, the students? Okay, let's move on to the next story. It's in the scriptures. This is Mark 5th chapter, first 20 verses. So they came to the country of the Gerasenes on the other side of the lake. Again, he's used lake right after that. As he stepped ashore, a man possessed by an unclean spirit came up to him from among the tombs where he had made his home. Nobody could control him any longer. Even chains were useless, for he had often been fettered and chained up, but had snapped his chains and broken the fetters. No one was strong enough to master him. Unceasingly, night and day, he would cry aloud among the tombs and on the hillsides and gash himself with stones. When he saw Jesus in the distance, he ran up and flung himself down before him, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, do not torment me." For Jesus was already saying to him, "Out, unclean spirit, come out of this man." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he said. "There are so many of us." And he implored Jesus not to send them out of the district. There was a large herd of pigs nearby, feeding on the hillside, and the spirits begged him, "Send us among the pigs. Let us go into them." He gave them their leave, and the unclean spirits came out and went into the pigs, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed over the edge into the lake and were drowned. The men in charge of them took to their heels and carried the news to the town and countryside, and the people came out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus and saw the madman who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there clothed and in his right mind, they were afraid. When witnesses told them that what had happened to the madman and what had become of the pigs, they begged Jesus to leave the district. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed begged to go with him, but Jesus would not let him. "Go home to your people," he said, "and tell them what the Lord in his mercy has done for you." The man went off and made known throughout the Decapolis what Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
And the pigs became lemmings, you know.
If they belonged to somebody, he was upset because
Yeah, that's what I was
2,000
thinking.
pigs were gone.
But who was the person that owned the 2,000 pigs? Was he a Jew?
They were wild pigs. Jews wouldn't have owned pigs.
Yeah, I was thinking about
Well,
that too.
didn't it say that the people that were watching the pigs ran to the city? Or does that mean that they were like,
Well, that's right. The men in charge
yeah,
took to their heels and went and said, "Here's what." So here's Jesus coming ashore. Here's the madman. Here's the pigs in the background up there on the high hill. Well, we had earlier talked about when Jesus first started an exorcism in Capernaum, and there are parallels. Is it Capernaum or Capernaum? Capernaum.
Capernaum is what I thought. Sure.
So the parallels, the demoniac challenge in one person was, "What do you want with Jesus, O Holy One of God?" And here it is, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The author points out that one of these, the first one, Jesus, Holy One of God, is a Jewish salutation, I guess you call her a Jewish title for Jesus. Whereas the second one, Son of the Most High God, and he didn't explain this, but the Son of the Most High God is I lost my word, but anyway, it would be a Gentile term title. Another parallel, Jesus in both places says, "Come out of him" or "come out of the man." And then the unclean spirit went out of him in Capernaum, and in Gerasa, it's the unclean spirits came out. And in one place, the crowd says they were astonished, and in another, they were afraid. The author says, it's Mark's pretty spare with his words. His is the shortest gospel, but here he's telling a story that is kind of repetitive in some respects. Why would he do this? Why would he? And he goes into quite a bit of actual detail of relating the story about the man, describing him and all this. My thought was, well, maybe it's the differences that explain why between the two rather than the parallels, why Mark told this story. There are differences. And so we might talk about that a little bit. So where does the exorcism in Capernaum take place? Or Capernaum? Capernaum.
That's the way they say it on the Hallmark movies.
Okay, Capernaum.
Wow.
I wouldn't want to go against Hallmark, So where does the exorcism in Capernaum take place? We just read that a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago. Where does it physically take place?
Ron just said Capernaum.
Well, okay.
That's where it took place.
Yeah, it's like, why is he
It says that
asking
right
us?
No, I'm a little more detail in that, though.
Oh, Ron, what's the rest of that?
Wasn't he in a synagogue?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So
I think you're
who
right.
would the audience have been then?
It was the high priests and all, because they were all upset because he did it on the Sabbath.
Okay, but they were all
Shouldn't have.
Jews, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there might have been some God-fearers among them,
Right.
but mostly Jews. So, where does the exorcism in the country of Gerasene take place? And who is the audience?
Well, we've got the pig herders.
We got pig herders.
So
It's beside the sea.
Gentiles. So these are the Gentiles who are his audience.
So the Gentiles are his audience. This is, and Mark points out, or the author points out that Mark uses Jesus going over the other side. There's several crossings across Galilean Lake.
Well, we also learned here a while back that exorcisms were quite common back then. And so, that may have had a little bit of influence on him writing the two different stories of exorcism as well.
So what does the other side symbolically represent? Oh, evil? Okay, think a little more.
Yeah, maybe it means he goes and talks to the Jews, and then he crosses and talks to the Gentiles. He's trying to spread his message.
Okay. The other side kind of represents the Gentile side.
Mm-hmm.
The Jordan is kind of like on the other side of the Jordan, east of the Jordan is kind of the Gentile side. When he's in the west of the Jordan, he's in Judah and the Jewish side. So this is kind of showing that Jesus is trying, at least this author thinks, this is the message that he's reaching to Jew and Gentile. And the fact that they have these disturbances on the sea or the lake, whichever, kind of represents symbolically an opposition to, or resistance to taking the message across to the other side. So.
Well, he also spread his ministry from the towns to the countryside too.
Okay, well, that's another point there. One's in kind of more of a urban setting or town setting. One's out in the countryside on the seashore. So here's some other differences. We never hear we only hear him described as unclean, having unclean spirit. We don't ever know his name, the demoniac at Capernaum. But Mark goes into a fair amount of detail about the one in Gerasa, which says he has an unclean spirit. He lives among the tombs, which, what's that mean for a Jewish person? No one has the strength to control him. He cuts himself. My version said gashes himself. And he says his name is Legion. This author takes up, some people can just view that as a thing that there's many spirits in him, because as soon as he says, my name is Legion, for we are many. I've read that myself that way for a long time, but the author has a much more political view of why Mark tells the gospel story the way he does. And he says that the term legion could only mean a division of Roman soldiers. And at that time, there were 4 legions of Roman soldiers that were occupying the eastern frontier, which includes Palestine. So there was an occupation going on in the time of Jesus and at the time of Mark, when Mark wrote it. But you don't pick that up that much in the Gospels, I don't think. It's always kind of like, not really aware of it, but I think you would have been aware of it big time if you'd been there, 4 legions of soldiers around the countryside. So anybody want to say what they think? Do they agree with this division of Roman soldiers? They have another opinion about that? There's more than one way to read the story.
Well, I don't know if this addresses that or not,
Okay, Terry?
but it seems to me that all of these, when you put together, it shows a God or Christ moving out to comprehend the situation of people,
Uh-huh.
not just focused or pointed to one group or one people who said, well, you've done what I told you to do. This Jesus is pervasive life. And that's what all of these are suggesting.
Okay.
What it's always kind of hit in my mind when it says I'm legion for we are many, I've always kind of thought, oh, the guy has, multiple personalities.
Okay.
And, maybe that's why he does this, thing and this thing. And
Okay. Well, let's see here. Nobody didn't change anybody's thinking that, oh, I hadn't thought about that might represent a Roman legion before, or
That is interesting. I thought of that. It could be for the political thing. Yeah.
well, I kind of like the idea because it gives me a fresh way of looking at something I've never thought of before. Okay, so this man, no one's able to subdue him. However, Jesus is able to get the man's name, Legion. And we've talked about this before, but in ancient times, if you knew someone's name, they thought that gave you some advantage or power over that person. But so he's able to command these unclean spirits to come out, and this reveals Jesus to be the stronger one. And we talked about the strong man in a previous parable. Jesus talked about strong man. Jim, did you have something?
Dennis, anyway, class, how many Roman soldiers in a legion?
5,000. 5,000.
5,000, and gee whiz. 20,000 soldiers to patrol Judea, and it's, wow.
You didn't mess with the Romans.
Huh?
But you didn't mess with the Romans.
I guess not. That
That
was a huge occupation.
Yes.
maybe the pigs belong to the Romans for their food.
Well, we'll get to that. Down there at the bottom it says, this is another word play the author talks about, and that's the word herd. A correct term for pigs, we call them a bunch of pigs, a drift, or a drove rather than herd. He said, and I didn't know this, I've read that dozens of times, and herd was just a lot of pigs, I thought, but he said that is a referral to a band of military recruits. And then this comes out again about pigs. The 10th Legion, which was in that region, occupied that region, and participated in the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 CE. The boar was their mascot, and what I read, they apparently adopted that so they could insult the Jews. And the Jews were known for their abstaining from pork, and the Romans were known for loving to eat pork. They considered pork a delicacy, and they made jokes about the Jews. And here's one joke that Augustus, the emperor, made one time. He said, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son, after Herod killed 2 of his own sons because he thought they were plotting against him. And then another, the author thinks that the way they portrayed the pigs, they charged down the hill like troops into battle is what he was saying. And like what happened to Pharaoh's army, another illusion kind of, they're swallowed by the sea. What I was interested in was, we have this account in the 4th chapter or the 5th chapter about the demons leaving this guy and entering these pigs, there's nothing told about the demons that left the Capernaum demoniac. Was that just not considered to be a relevant detail, or not? Or is just wasn't pertinent to the story, so they didn't include it there? I don't know. Whoops, get that. So there's details that he provides in this story, and it's like, okay, that adds to the drama. And who had the pigs? You know, what happened to that guy? I mean, so here's our pigs going over the cliff.
Pigs grow relatively quickly, so if you have 2,000 or 20,000 troops come into an area, they're going to have a lot of food to sustain them, and it probably isn't all available from stealing it from the
Well, when they got it from the
people
Jews,
close by.
Yeah.
They probably don't have that much food to.
That's a good point.
But
I hadn't thought about that. The 4 legions needing to have a food supply, and here's 2,000 pigs that would be for that. So, the country of Gerasene, it was part of Decapolis, which you see is right here. And my slide is this is Gerasa. Here's the lake up here. Here's Gerasa down here, which is what the country of the Gerasene is named for, is this town here. So,
Well, also a lot of people, since they didn't have mass transportation, that the Sea of Galilee is a little ways from the ocean or from the
Mediterranean Sea.
So, for some people, a large lake may seem like the sea.
Okay.
Because they've never seen the real thing. Until you see the ocean, for the first time, you just don't have a concept of how big it is.
Yeah.
And how majestic it is.
I wanted to point out that location because there's a little bit of a problem. Gerasa is 30 miles southeast of the seaside locale that we read about in the story. It's not close to the sea or this lake. The author thinks there's a reason why he made this identification. And this is the story he tells that he thinks explains why Mark called it that, said this is where it occurred. And then Josephus, he was a historian in the time of in the 1st century. And he said that Vespasian, who was the Roman general in charge of the occupation and the war against, when the Jews revolted, during that revolt, he was the commanding general, and he sent his cavalry and foot soldiers to Gerasa, where they killed 1,000 young men, took captives, and burned the town to the ground. Mark was either written during or shortly after the Jewish revolt, scholars believe. So he thinks that this is Mark's trying to call to mind, and it would have been pretty fresh in their minds, this Roman occupation of the region and the destruction of Gerasa, the town, Gerasa. So, sound plausible?
Very. Stop and think about nursery rhymes. They were all political statements.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it makes you think, yeah.
That's true.
So here's some questions talking about the story. Why were the people afraid when they saw the madman sitting by Jesus in his right mind? I mean, now he's calm. And why did they beg Jesus to leave the district?
Assuming that the herd of pigs were the Roman.
Possible, yeah.
And assuming that they are being raised or cultivated by non-Jews, I don't that time would have had flocks of pigs. Then I'm not sure they're reacting to the man sitting there calmly. I think they're reacting to the fact that Jesus took an action that caused 2,000 pigs or more to go into the sea, which was part of their livelihood.
Well, they could have had Jews watching the pigs, though, if they were oppressed and, being used by the soldiers, forced to do that.
But the owner and the people who are herding them are probably upset. The people in the town are upset because that would be part of their livelihood.
Well, and the Roman soldiers are not going to be happy. Yes, they're going to come punish somebody.
I think Dane probably, I'm thinking political terms more.
Yeah.
Here's somebody that's kind of upset things. They may be fearing retribution. This guy's here, and look what he's done while he's here. The Roman army, they'll settle the score. That might be what they're thinking. I don't know. That's just trying to, like I said, this author thinks in political terms a lot, and so I think that might be a reason why they were afraid. Maybe it's like back to the sea incident. What can this guy do?
Yeah.
People fear what they don't understand.
So the author says this exorcism is a key episode in Jesus, the stronger one, struggle to bind the strong man, the parable he talked about earlier in 3:27 to 30. That symbolically, the political and ideological authority of the strong man, which is in those two exorcism stories are the scribal establishment and the Roman military, that these exorcisms have repudiated that authority. And the way has been cleared for kingdom ministry to commence in full to both Jew, which was Capernaum, and the country of the Gerasenes of for the Gentiles. So what do you think? You think that's the author's onto something, or is he reading too much symbolically?
That's like modern warfare, actually. Cut off the supply.
Okay.
The troops, they go away, you're free.
That's right.
That works
Very
sometimes.
strategic.
Yeah.
Strategic.
Eloise?
I've been going through all this in my mind, and I can't get my mind off of what I read yesterday. The new AARP magazine came
Okay.
out, and
I got it.
just glanced over a bit of it, and it talks about an anti-Semitism movement in the States right now.
Okay.
What's going on that I don't get? I live with a lot of Jewish people, and it's just fine, except when we go through the dinner line and there's pork on the menu and they hear them.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's no problem. Am I missing something?
Well, you're missing the anti-Semitism that's rising up in the country.
And why is it? That's my question.
Well,
Why?
the
Does it go
neo-Nazis,
back to this? Does
the
it go back
neo-Nazis and the what's the other one they call
Alt-right.
the white supremacists have reemerged as a vocal thing in the country, where they used to keep it all under wraps for many, many years. You didn't hear anything about them. And they built up their numbers enough that they're starting to be more vocal and more active again.
So what does that do?
They're the ones that are behind the anti-Semitism. And it's not just Jews. It's also Asians, anybody that's not a white
And Hispanic.
person, and Hispanics, anybody that's not white.
People who live alternate lifestyles, whether they're
Yeah.
gay or trans or whatever LGBT.
Well, I looked at that and I thought, well, this is just what we need, you know. And I thought, what am I missing? I don't understand this at all. But as I've gone through this morning, it just makes me wonder if it goes back to the.
Well, everything has gone back to that. I mean, that's what Hitler came from. You know, that's why he gained his power, is because he was able to blame the Jews, and there were enough Christians and Gentiles and all the different religions. They were okay with it, partly because the Bible is interpreted that the Jews were the ones that did things wrong. You know, Jews crucified Jesus. I mean, it was really easy to fall into anti-Semitism. And I think it still is.
Well, that is the question that you asked Eloise is unanswerable.
Well, it really makes me sad to even think
It's
about it.
and it's been going on for so long.
Yeah.
And I think the problem that we have in our country is we have so many different factions of people that live here. You have Arabs, you have Asians, you have blacks, you have whites, you have everything in the world all jumbled up together. And you have social media that's everybody wants to be king, and it's just a recipe for division. It's a recipe for lashing out. And I think that's just what's happening.
Is there somebody behind you also?
I wanted to say, don't forget of the 18 million people that were killed in the concentration camp, only 6 of them were Jewish. So who were those other 12 million people? They were people that were against Hitler, that had no voice. So that's another thing to think about. We've got to keep our voice if we think we know something that should be said. And this is a good example of it.
Yeah.
Well,
Food for thought.
that was the last of what I had for the chapter. But then this book has a section they call "The Word in Our World," where they tried to bring what was happening in Jesus' time and in Mark's time to current events or our current contemporary situation. So we're running out of time. But Jesus restored the man to wholeness, to community, and to self-possession. The story of demon possession and occupation became one of exorcism and liberation. So one sign that the Gerasa man was possessed by demons was that he cried aloud. I have a version, another Bible that says he howled among the tombs, and he cut himself or gashed himself with stones. In our society or as individuals, what are signs that would indicate that we are possessed by demons?
Mental illness.
Mental illness, hate, what Eloise was talking about would seem to be an indication to me, which is ties back to yours, Coral.
You know, we've gotten to the point, and I know families that are like this, where they can't sit down at the Thanksgiving Sunday table because of their radically different views on politics, socially. I think that's part of being discussing they've gotten to the point where I think listen to disagree. And I'm talking to her.
Yeah.
What I've seen is I just feel like there's a lot of what I would call radical, extreme. I'm in this camp. There's
no assimilation.
Yeah, there's no moderation. There's no reconciliation.
No meeting of the minds.
Everyone comes here and they want to still be who they were.
Yeah.
With all the things that they're fleeing, basically. So I think it's going to take about 2 or 3 generations. Once everybody's blended together better.
But how is that blending together?
I don't know. It's just going to happen naturally.
You know, I keep going to the mission initiatives and saying, okay, that's one of the things we're trying to do.
You know, a couple of times a year at Johnson County College, they have a naturalization ceremony.
Yeah.
And typically there are 200 or 300 members who've gone through the process of learning English, understanding the Constitution, understanding our form of government. And I don't see there being a lack of need or interest in assimilating. They have done what they can to become citizens and become equal partners in the story of this country. This is my personal bias, that from 20 to 30 years, we've talked about the fact that white male Americans will become the minority. And that's a very difficult thing for many white, especially middle class and older men, to accept. And I think that much of the surface of anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and all that is a fear that we will lose control of this American experience. And what we fail to see is that all the way along, from the very beginning, it's not just a white American experience. It includes natives, it includes Asian Americans, African Americans. I mean, it goes on and on. Not just European Americans. And I think there are many people who are fearful of our losing control, power over the biggest.
I think Steve hit it on the head. You know, that everybody wants it to be like it was where they came from, and you know that scares everybody because they don't want that. They want everybody to speak English. They want everybody to do, you know, what we do, rather than.
I think I read an article, maybe in the last 6 years, show about it. When the Italians and the Irish came over here in the early 1900s, they wanted to be American. They wanted to do away, you know, they wanted to leave that whatever they left and learn English and participate in the government and so forth, and fought for the country. But that, I think, is nowadays people just want to be a tribe. They want to stay with their little faction. Others want to stay with themselves, and they don't want to.
But Steve, the Irish and the Italians warred with each other in New York because they were in their little tribes too.
I'm just saying, I just read an article about one person talking about his experience.
I know, but I really think that the people coming into America.
This guy demanded his family do the same. He said, "You are not Italians. You are American."
I think there's a lot of immigrants now that say the exact same.
Well, that could be.
I actually had the privilege of going to a naturalization ceremony where our judge oversaw it. And they're crying. I mean, these people were so excited to become American.
Absolutely.
So
there's a lot of
tribes. I think you're right about tribes, but I think, like what Jonathan said, we're more afraid of losing our tribe than they are.
Well, I will say in Boston, you know, they have these enclaves. North was Italian, Southeast was Irish.
Sure.
There was, the blacks were forced somewhere.
We've always had tribes, yeah.
But I think it was the culture of Boston. Because Boston is...
Well, New York had it too. I mean, we all do.
Fairly, well, it's fully pronounced.
We're gonna have this. Eloise, you're the last one.
Okay, I just want to invite everybody Thursday night to book club.
Okay.
Remember, is it Killers of the Flower Moon?
Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah,
that sounds really good.
Awesome.
And it's
talk about trumping on the tribe.
It's about another case of demon possession, you might say.
7 o'clock, right here.
7 o'clock right here.
Right
Be here.
Thursday night.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
so
Sammy, this is for
so
Sammy.
before you leave, can you imagine what your life would be like if we were liberated from our demons? That's going to be your closing
Say
thought.
that again?
Can you imagine what life would be like if we were liberated from our demons?